Some folks will like you and some that just won't. Some that stay real and some that just don't. Trying to fit in will only take you so far. You'll never find home trying to change who you are. So don't spend your whole life trying to be what you ain't. You can't hide your heart with a new coat of paint. You think they'll accept you, I promise they can't. So just be who you are, forget what they think. So just be who you are and forget what they think.
Welcome to Vet with a Mic, content driven by veteran issues. So today we're going to mix it up a little bit because we're actually not talking to a veteran. We're talking to somebody who is actually still in the uniform. So Jonathan, yes, tonight has been trained in the Army's approach to handle some pretty significant issues that we have all experienced in the uniform one way or the other. And I thought with the amount of training in which he has had within this specific arena, I would just let him do the majority of talking. So, Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, brother. Thank you so much for having me on.
I know, it's a pleasure. Like I said, our paths kind of connected through somebody that you also served with, which was a really cool symmetry of the universe, so to speak. I guess it's the second time I've referenced that in an episode, so it might be my new thing, symmetry of the universe.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's very zen.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the specific training that you have acquired now in the Army.
Yeah, for sure. So with the Tennessee National Guard, we're very proud to utilize what we call assist training, which is applied suicide intervention skills training. We do so through assist workshops. It's training produced by Living Works. It's an organization that's been around since the 80s, or the training has been around since the 80s, and it's got practitioners or teachers from across the world.
Right.
One of my instructors was actually from Scotland, so it was a very unique experience.
Oh, wow.
But we were all kind of unified under the ground that we had to tackle suicidal ideation.
Sure.
We had to be a part of the solution.
Right.
So I noticed that whenever I speak with a veteran, or whenever we talk to soldiers who are still in uniform, there is an annual requirement that we have to do. It's like an hour-long PowerPoint, or technically the answer is however long it takes, right? Sometimes it's a little later. But it's a check in the block that typically that we have to do to say, to tell big DOD that we've done it. But the one thing that I'm really proud about the Tennessee National Guard in general is that we recognized that wasn't fulfilling the need. We recognized that even though it was good that we made people aware, and we had, an ACE card, which is, a little card we kept in our wallets that kind of gave us a very rudimentary or basic understanding of what we may need to do in order to report someone with suicidal ideation. But we recognized, with slogans and sayings such as like 22 a day and things of that nature, and with also our own personal experiences within our own ranks, that something more had to be done.
Sure.
And that's where assist came in. That's where the workshop came in, and it really works. It's 2 days. And what happens whenever you go through and you teach a PowerPoint, for example, you have your leader up there, and usually it's either an officer or a high-ranking NCO teaching the class in uniform. But with assist, you leave the uniform at the door. You go on a first-name basis, and it's all, enlisted officers. You don't know who's who. Like, it's just humans gathering together to talk about their experiences in suicide. Yeah. And it's metric-driven. So really, there's evidence to support that it doesn't just help us talk about suicide. It gives us an approach that actually works. Law enforcement use it. First responders use it. Soldiers use it. But also teachers use it. Clinicians use it. Anybody can use it. And that's the versatility of the model really makes it successful. And that's why I'm a big proponent of it and use it, almost every day.
Sure. So obviously you don't get into work like this without there being how this subject has touched you personally. And you were kind enough to send me a write-up that your command had done for you. You said it was like last year, right? Or a couple years ago?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Right. So how does this issue impacted you personally? What drives your passion for it?
So I'm a combat engineer, like I mentioned earlier, right? So we're pounding pickets. We play with explosives. We're a rowdy bunch, right? When we talk about COIN, we talk about our involvement in COIN or counterinsurgency, if you will. We handle the we're route clearance. We sniff out the bombs, and you have to be a little crazy to kind of do that job. And I love it. We love it. But our camaraderie is really what makes being a combat engineer or being an engineer in the military. Really, our motto is "Essayons," which translates into "Let us try." Right, and it's French, and everyone kind of gives us grief about it. But when you translate it, "Essayons" means "Let us try" is not a motto to be like, "Oh, let me try it." It's like, you messed up, you failed. Let the engineer show you how it's done.
Sure.
Right. So we have this bravado about us, right? And yet we notice that when we talk about mental health, or we talk about something that involves us being kind of vulnerable, our military culture in general kind of fails us, and that we just don't. We don't like to talk about it. We have these cookie cutter phrases such as elevator talk, where we say, "Oh, living the dream. Hey, warrior, how you holding up? Oh, kill. Roger that. You just drive forward, and mission comes first. You do it."
You know what? I don't mean to interrupt you. You know what I used to say as an add-on to that is I would say live in the dream, and then I would say, yeah, too bad nightmares are dreams too, right?
Yeah, too bad. Yeah, and usually my response is somebody. I'm not sure whose dream, but I'm living.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So there's always that cutaway, and we mask the pain through humor,
right?
But how it interacts us with daily, we notice this. So personally, I come into the work, as a combat engineer who majored in journalism in college. This wasn't going to be my calling. This was mental health was never going to be initially my focus until I noticed that there was a critical need. And as leaders, me being an officer in the Army, there's a critical need in this department. When we talk about mental health, we can send somebody to sick call if they break their leg, and we get them a cast. And no one, we may joke about it, like, "Oh, let me sign your cast," or "Oh, your cast is in pink." We might rip on them, but in no means do we ever look down on them for getting that cast, right?
Sure.
But as a culture, not just as in a military, just as a culture in general.
Yeah, the American culture. Yeah.
The American culture, exactly. We have a stigma about mental health, and there's probably good reason for that, right? But ultimately, we think it may protect us, but we don't think twice about when someone gets that cast, but yet we don't entertain the idea of having a lot of conversation where we're vulnerable when we talk about mental health.
Right.
So we can want that awareness. We could say, "Oh yeah, let's talk about mental health and let's address suicide," and we'll slap a bumper sticker that says 22 a day on her, and that's where most people stop. And that's got to change. It's got to change.
Yeah. And it was funny. Last interview, I mentioned a story that had happened to me where I watched a young E3 kind of raise his hand and say, "Hey, I need to talk to somebody." And then the command structure just totally pivoted and jerked him out of our work space because we handled weapons every day in my job. So obviously, so they downloaded him and they put him doing a task where he wasn't at risk. And he was just really saying, "Hey, this is my first duty station. I'm away for the holidays. I'm feeling a little blue." But that's how we have treated mental health within the uniform before. So I guess that brings me to this. Being an officer, you have to undo so much suspicion from the enlisted ranks.
Absolutely.
Because we, in a lot of ways, we believe that you have no idea what it's like to be enlisted in the uniform, and our sense of control is just so different in the enlisted ranks versus the officer ranks. And I think there's that power disparity obviously built in within the hierarchy. So how do you guys, what do you do to undermine all of that, tension and baggage?
So I would submit that the first thing you have to do is when it, because you're right, there can be a real divide between that suspicion, and it could be based off of personal experience or bias, or it could just be something that they have witnessed. Something happened to someone else. That's a big proponent of what happens when we talk about mental health. Like, oh, I heard that there was a unit at another, in another part of the state, which they took the dude out in handcuffs because he talked about mental health. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want to lose my career. Yeah. So the first thing you have to do is just, and as an officer, you metaphorically take the uniform off.
Right.
You take the rank off, especially like, hey, listen, you make eye contact with him. You're like, I've noticed, and we call these things invitations. Invitations are like signals. You're like, hey, I've noticed that you're more lethargic than normal. I noticed that when we start talking about mental health, you're more jittery. You're looking around. You're looking. You're breathing heavier. There's some things that make me have to ask. How are you doing? Are you okay? Yeah. And you connect with them on a personal level. And really, when you think about how you train as an officer or how you interact with your Joes as an officer, if you are just the leader that's just going to bark at them, they're not going to respect you anyway.
Right.
You have to connect with your guys. That's one of the things that my Joes always taught me. And one of the grateful things I have before taking command or for ever being put in front of a platoon, I just watched my men interact with each other. And there's no tighter family than our service members. Like that is a tight family.
Right.
And if you want to be a part of that family, you have to be a part of that family, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you'll notice my emphasis on, you have to actually you have to walk your walk and talk your talk. Otherwise, they're not going to respect you. And mental health is no different. If you sat there and say, guys, I care about you, don't entertain suicidal ideation. Your leadership cares about you. Just tell us when you have these problems and thoughts.
Yeah, we have an open door policy.
Yeah, you have so many people have an open door policy, right?
Yeah.
And then when a Joe goes to interact with that and has a negative experience, or they hear you openly say, "Man, I think anybody who takes their life are cowards," or you just shut that door, right? You're not walking that walk. What you're doing is you're letting your personal opinion overflow theirs, and they're not going to come to you.
Right.
They're just not. So I think what I'm trying to do is, combine those two trains of thought. Like, you want to be a leader. Well, know that just barking and yelling at orders isn't the way to go. I mean, sure, they may execute them to the best of their ability, but are they going to respect you? Are they going to follow you? Mental health is no different. If you're just going to sit there and tell them that it's important, and then your actions deny that statement or deny that, viewpoint, then that's what an unbelieving world finds unbelievable.
Right.
So you have to adjust that. Do you want me to turn on the light? I'm sorry, the sun.
Yeah, actually, you are. Just the shadow is communicating. There we go.
All right. There we go. I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries at all. Like,
the sun was like, now it's cloudy.
And I guess I got my sailor life like channeled. I'm at darkened ship over here. I'm all redded out. No, that's the thing about when we talk about these kind of thoughts. Everybody has them to some degree, and whenever in my clinical training, the training that I've received at the master's level, one of the things that the instructors really hone in on is people are pretty ambivalent over suicide. Like, even if you are feeling like you may want to take your own life, they're looking for reasons to not do it. They're very receptive for some leverage, so to speak, to be applied to talk them out of it. They want you to interact with them in a way that gives them the reason that they are looking for. Because otherwise, if they weren't at least partially ambivalent about it, you would never know.
Right.
But they do. They talk. They give you those signs, like you just said. There are those things that you can cue in on. Absolutely. So I'm a little bit more interested in that because, in our training, we get a little bit of everything and a whole lot of nothing.
Right.
But you have spent about 1,000 hours now.
Right.
And just looking at these details. So tell us a little bit more about what are those signs for all of us out there who maybe they're concerned about a buddy. Maybe there's somebody in their life that they think may be at risk. What can they key in on?
Right. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, brother, because there's a big part of what I teach is that we have to come into a situation where someone may be suffering with suicidal ideation with the understanding that there is a chance or hope for life. They want to choose life. If there was zero hope or chance, they would not be here. You would not even have the conversation. Their personal pronouns will be was and were, and they'd be relegated to the past tense, right? So the issue that you have to have, and a lot of, when we deal with what we call postvention or post care with an individual that takes their life, so many people who are connected to that individual say, why I didn't see this coming, or I didn't know that was there. But in most cases, not all, but in most cases, and this is metrically proven, there's usually some sort of invitation. So when I say invitation, that's what I mean by signals, right? They're producing something that catches your attention. In the veteran community, it's often something small, just like their talkative pattern, they change. Normally if they're normally cutting up after formation, or they're joking and they're going to go to the gym a lot with you, and they're just genuinely extroverted individual, and all of a sudden they start withdrawing, right, and going back into a shell, if you will. That would be what we call an invitation. Now, what's important to understand about these invitations, I'll list a few for you.
Right.
A lot of the military, finances, divorce, deployments, issues with chain of command, issues with the new, like PT test, for example, the new ACFT. There's a lot of anxiety about it. There's a lot of anxiety about having to qualify. So I knew one individual that I talked with that was suicidal because they kept failing to qualify, and their buddies were ripping on them. Right.
Sure.
Now, the issue, that was just an invitation, right? The issue, like he was just so distraught that this was the multiple attempt to try to qualify, and he failed. But really, his girlfriend left him. His mom found out that they had cancer, right? And there was just a lot more going on. But that just happened to be the invitation that was signaling that something wasn't right, right? And if we didn't know, or if we didn't take initiative to go and recognize those invitations, talk to that individual, he may not be with us because he was in fact suicidal. So the important thing to know about signals or invitations, if I were to give it, is just because somebody is sad or depressed, they're giving away their things. If they're saying, hey, I want you to have this, and it's like their favorite watch, or their rifle, their own AR-15 or something, right? Then you'd be like, hey, are you giving me this, right? So you probe, and those invitations, it's important to explore them. But what's also as important, especially in our community, is that just because somebody is demonstrating an invitation, that does not mean that they're suicidal, right? So how do we know that they're suicidal? How do we know? Because somebody's girlfriend left them, and they lost their job, or they have a gambling problem, or they're having financing problems, or maybe they might lose their house, or they're not happy in the barracks or living situations that they're in, or they're in an upcoming deployment they're anxiety about. Those are all invitations in themselves don't necessarily mean they're suicidal, right?
Right.
So how do we know? You ask. You notice those invitations, and you start the conversation. If you don't, that's the bare minimum. And it's important to ask directly, because it's like, are you thinking about harming yourself? There's a lot of answers to that question. Like, no, it's not going to hurt at all. Right. So that changes the dynamic of the conversation. Right.
Yeah.
So I think and I know I'm kind of long winded, but
no worries at all. That's why you're here.
Right. So those invitations, they can come in many shapes and sizes and forms. The important part is if you notice something that just sticks out to you, it could be anything. It could be, all of a sudden that they start looking disheveled, or if, for example, if they stop taking pride in their appearance when they were the most squared away soldier that you had, it might be something, hey man, this isn't like you. Is everything okay? And that's the start, right? Is everything okay? And then I'm fine. And brother, you're never late for formation, or you're always going to the gym with me on time. You gained a lot of weight. Is everything okay? Right? You just have this conversation, and if you don't have those conversations, or you don't explore those invitations, then at the end of the day, when, if what we call postvention is when an individual actually takes their life, everyone in the community is wondering what they could have done,
Right.
or why this happened, and the grief is inherited to their tribe,
Yeah.
right? So the best way, in my personal experience, is to be, doesn't matter their rank, doesn't matter their gender, doesn't matter their nationality. It just approach them as a person
Sure.
who cares. And if you do that, it's good.
So I think one of the hardest things is all of that ancillary support that you just talked about after the uniform all kind of goes away. You're not really seeing somebody every day like you would have like in morning quarters, or you're not seeing all those like subtle changes.
Absolutely.
Because you lose that huge social support element that the uniform often provides you. So I guess, how do we spot these things at a distance? And I know that that's a tricky spot, because even mental health professionals are pretty, their track record's not the best at being able to spot these issues, because if in a perfect world, we would have no suicides, but we still have them. So what can we do, like from the veteran community? How do we spot those things? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, because
I'm happy to.
If that goes beyond your lane, so to speak.
No, I can absolutely tell you, because with me, being in the National Guard, now granted, I'm on active duty orders a lot. Like I'm on a deployment right now, right? So there's just a lot of opportunities that I have, but if I were to strip myself, and I'm just an M-Day soldier, right? How can you connect with your chain of command a week and a month? It's really difficult. So one thing that you can do, that when you're at a distance, we can use the platform, for example, social media. Like if you're on Facebook, or if you notice somebody's emailing, the big thing within the veteran community that we have, that when people are putting the uniform down for the final time, right? I've always noticed that initially they're excited to get that DD-214 or that NGB-22, right? They're just happy. They're like, I'm out. See you, suckers, and they're holding the middle finger, right? And they're like, yeah, I'm out. I'm never going to miss you guys. And then
I know for me personally, there was probably a me-sized hole in the wall of how quickly.
Like Wiley Coyote, right? Just boom, flush right through it.
Just like Looney Tunes. That's the way I felt. Like you couldn't tell me nothing. I was ready. Yeah.
And nowadays we try to get everybody to re-extend, like, you want to sign up for another 6 years, and they're like, they
tried that. They tried that with me, but I was like,
I'm sure they did. Yeah, like, come on, man, you're gonna miss it.
Yeah, I know. And it's funny is I do miss the, just, and by all means I'll let you get back. I miss the camaraderie. I miss the back and forth with people.
Absolutely. I wouldn't, especially being a combat engineer, I would be incomplete. I know that. I know that about me personally. If when I'm hanging the uniform up, I'm going to have a hard time. I know that personally. Now, that being said, what we can do as a community is we got to do better for our veterans. We know about, the struggle and issues they face with not just PTSD. PTSD is the one that's beat up a lot, and we talk about it constantly. There's a lot of awareness for it, but really just the community that they're belonging. A lot of my fellow soldiers that became veterans and put their uniform up reach back out and contact me, because they know as when I told them in leadership, and again, that comes with walking the walk, right? And talking the talk, that, listen, just because you put up that uniform doesn't mean you stop being my brother or sister. It doesn't stop.
Sure. Yeah.
So what we can do, or what we spot from a distance, if we see those invitations, and those invitations could be a social media post, like nothing matters. I see that constantly. And then I pick up the phone, or I call on Facebook Messenger. That's really handy, and be like, hey, bud, when you say nothing really matters, kind of got me worried about you. I hadn't seen you since we drilled 3 years ago. There's always a break in contact. Life gets busy. We're all adults, but it's never too soon to be like, thinking about you. Are you okay? I noticed these things, those invitations that we talked about. And we can elaborate more on that if you'd like. But the big thing that you have to be able to do, and I'm sure that you're tracking this as a mental care professional as well, is if you reach out, you got to see it through, and you just have to show that you actually care enough to have that conversation. It might be a tough conversation to have. I don't know if you've actually, and I'm sure you have, but for many individuals, they've never had to look a man or a woman in the eye and go, "Are you thinking about killing yourself?" And then have the repercussion of them saying yes.
Yeah,
like that's big. So
it is an alien. It is an alien experience,
right? And and the reason why I'm so like, hey, this is important when we walk through that door is because when we're doing at a distance, they have the keyboard buffering, right?
Right.
Face to face, we have this disconnect, right? Especially introverted individuals. They may lie to your face, but you get them on a computer and their little fingers are, and they're actually probably more likely to be honest with you through that. So you just have to be prepared and not have, an anxiety attack if they say, yeah, I think I am. And the best thing you can do is just sit there and be like, okay, so we're talking about suicide. I want to help you to the best of my ability. They may be angry. They may be navigating their own emotions. They may be relieved that they actually told somebody, right? But the good news about all of that is now, today, there's tons of resources, tools, and information out there that you can get with right-click, copy, and paste, right? And navigating this experience or this conversation is a different challenge than doing it in person. And in person, it's way more intimate. It's more challenging. It can be more challenging in a different regard, but there's also, in my experience, the reality that when people are behind a screen, all you have to do is take a look at Reddit or YouTube and read the comment section to know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
they're
for
a lot more open. They like to spit that venom and vitriol when they can, especially if they're, not in a good place. So you just have to be patient, understand yourself. Look, I genuinely care. I'm not a bot. You didn't contact, a chat service and get this automatic response. I'm a person that is legitimately worried or concerned about your state of mind. You don't even have to know the person. If they made a Facebook post that's like, nothing matters anymore and I'm struggling with mental health and I'm not going to make it. How hard is it to click two buttons and be like, hey, listen, I'm thinking of you. Right. And no BS. I'm thinking of you. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. But what's important about that is back it up, walk the walk.
Right.
If they message you, respond. If they call you, pick up.
Yeah. Obviously there's a lot of pressure to perform around those kind of situations. And not everybody's had nearly the level of training that you have or even that I have. So what can the layman do after they've taken it as far as their rope will take them, so to speak? Bad turn of phrase, I suppose. But they're going to run out of their own level of information to offer. So when do they have to make that call to bring somebody in? Is there any guidance that you feel like when's the good time? Because obviously there's a time in which you may be at the end of what you can do or say. So
absolutely.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're bringing a lot of good dialogue and what I like to, fuel to the rampage. Right. So the big thing, and that I always preach with my fellow soldiers, my fellow veterans, and also just people that are interested in mental health and talking to the veteran community, is you have to know your limits. You have to know where you stand. And if you don't have the capacity to progress further in the conversation, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because just showing them that you were there long enough to care is going leaps and bounds above anything else they probably experienced. That's just the cold reality. At least that's every testimonial I receive. Like, hey, listen, if you weren't here at this date, at this time, all of it had been like, you listened. That alone was huge. But there's nothing wrong. We preach and we harp on this. Know your limits, know your limitations. So if you yourself are overwhelmed, what if it's your sister? What if it's your brother?
Sure.
It becomes extremely personal, right?
Right. Yeah.
They're telling you, I'm thinking about, you can be angry. If they're thinking, I'm thinking about killing myself, you might want to slap the crap out of them, right? And I'm trying to watch my language because the combat engineer in me is wanting to use some colorful dialogue.
That's all right. That's okay.
Yeah, you just want to. And I remember when my company commander took his life, we were
that must be. Earlier, whenever I asked you how this has really impacted you personally.
Oh yeah. Oh,
this
man.
is the story then, because we all have them who we think about in this issue. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was trying to go down that path. I'll just lay it out real quick, and then I'll tell you why it's important that you have. I'll tie it into passing the buck.
Sure.
Okay? So what I mean by passing the buck, I'll get to that in a second. But my company commander took his life, and then shortly after, we lost several great NCOs. One was in the recruiting element, and then I lost several specialists. It was almost like it was a cancer that spread.
Yeah, there's a contagion element to it.
When you see a company commander take their life, there's a lot of strong. And the thing about, everyone was like, oh, well, suicide is weakness. I understand the anger and the venom that they say when they put that in those words. I get why, because you just you're not there navigating with them. You don't understand. But let me tell you something about, like, when that dude deployed to Afghanistan, his call sign was Bloodhound. They looked for bombs.
Yeah.
That's what they did for that deployment.
It's not very cowardly.
No, not at all. It's not cowardly. And if there's any word I would use to define that man, it would not be cowardly.
Yeah.
That's just not, it's not in the dictionary for his photo. It's just not. Now, that being said, all of us, when I remember my readiness NCO at the time just was really heartbroken. They had gotten close. When you deploy to a combat zone like that and you look for bombs, you get close. So they're all going, why? How could this happen? And then shortly after, we lost several more, because when they see a position of authority, they're like, well, he did it. Maybe he had the right idea. And it just spreads. It's like a water drop.
Yeah.
And it just spreads out.
And then often there's almost, that other people can see how people react to it. And that almost reinforces the desire to want to do it, because maybe they're remembered fondly, and people have there's an event in which we talk about it, and people that, oh, well, then I'll be remembered too. They'll have the same thing for me. Yeah. Yeah,
that's possible. Another thing that I hear a lot was, well, I want to see that person again, especially if we're really close.
Yeah.
There's a spiritual element to that. And then there's also just sheer anger and then contempt for the world that you live in. Right. Like, well, they took my friend from me. So for me, I had plenty of opportunities. So not only did my commander take his life, and I lost several soldiers, but then it started affecting my personal family. I had a relative take their life. I had close friends take their life. Yeah. Like, we're talking lifelong friends from freshman year of high school, and then, or childhood.
Sure.
And and there's only so many that can happen to you in such a short amount of time when you start thinking inwardly, right? You're like, am I this cancer? Like, why does this keep happening to me? Why is this happening to my family and my friends? And so I understand whenever, especially if you have personal experience with suicidal ideation, that's just a short and condensed version. I've been to more funerals. I think that I have really had to start practicing cognitive dissonance to actually survive and not go crazy. But I chose to be a part of the solution and do everything I could. Because, when you said you have this training, I don't like to think of it as training. At this point, it's experience. At this point, it's not I didn't learn this from college. This wasn't my major. I had some really good teachers and instructors, but they harped on my experience. They said, this is in you already, utilize it. And they gave me a model in which to execute. Yeah. But if I know, if it's someone, like, for example, if it's another one of my soldiers, my natural default is anger, because I'm like, I love you. You're my brother. You're my sister. Why are you thinking about this? I don't want to lose you. Why would you be okay with losing me? Because I can't follow you. Right. And so there's a lot of internal dialogue there. And I know that if I'm not the guy, or also being in the military, they're in my chain of command, there are some legal things that I have to do. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
In regards to reporting it to my chain of command. I can go into more of that later in regards to,
No, I mean, I assume that you have similar guidelines as we do. Like, you're mandatory reporter. You have to, there's
a lot of apprehension about that in the military community. Like, I have soldiers that are scared to come talk to me because they're afraid I'll run to the battalion commander or whatever and be like, hey, you won't believe such and such. And I promise and I assure you that's not how it goes down. And I know that's a stigma, but at least, especially with me, That's not how that goes down.
So what, maybe we can just dispel that right now then. Within our discipline, confidentiality is a pretty strong concept.
Yeah.
Like, you're not allowed to break confidentiality, because if you do, like, that just undermines the whole profession.
Right.
So you better have a really good, solid reason for doing it. So how does one, from your experience and your training, how does one recognize a credible threat?
Well, it's not hard. It really isn't. If a military service member or veteran, especially, is demonstrating enough signals and invitation that the conversation has come up, you can pretty much tell if it's genuine. And even if it isn't, you always treat it as if it is.
Sure.
Because even if it's a boy who cried wolf scenario, you don't want to be short that one time where it was life or death, right? So you always treat it seriously. But when we talk about confidentiality, it's important, again, to connect to the person as an individual, right? So I take my captain rank off. I throw it down on my commander, if it's my company. And I say, listen, I'm just worried about you, not just as a soldier, but as a person. And I understand you may be apprehensive to come and talk to me because of reporting requirements. I just want you to know that you're talking to me as a man first, right? As your fellow human who's worried about your well-being. Now, you also never, ever, ever make a promise you cannot keep. That's the one thing you cannot do. Because if the second you say, listen, I'm not going to tell the first sergeant or the company commander this, and then you go off, or for example, if you're like, listen, I'm not going to tell anybody, you don't have to worry. And they're like, well, I'm planning on shooting up a store tomorrow.
Yeah, obviously.
Then you're going to have to break your promise, right? Because at that point, the person is a danger to themselves or others. In the military scenario, if you go and you're like, listen, I'm not going to tell the chain of command, you don't have to worry about it. And then they're like, yeah, I'm going to take my life. And then they word gets back to the commander or the first sergeant that you didn't tell them, or you didn't report it up, or something, God forbid, something actually happened to that individual or that service member, then the hammer that comes down sets a precedent for other people that also need help. So it's also something you don't want to do.
So I think this is productive for two reasons. Number one, because a lot of us veterans out there have been once bitten, twice shy.
Oh, for sure.
And so I think we need to spend a little bit of time here clearing up exactly why the military generally views why we have to talk about it and report certain things to certain people. Because the ultimate goal for the military is mission first, and that person is a vital component of the readiness.
Right.
And so they can't afford to have high attrition rates of any type.
Right.
So I understand it, like, because I've even had buddies who have talked to me about, I wish I could talk to you about stuff, because I talked to this one person in the uniform, and man, they went and snitched on me and told, because the limits of confidentiality are different in the uniform, because the provider has to think of the mission, not just the person. But in the civilian world, you think of the person, the client has your ultimate fidelity, not the mission anymore. Right. So people are trying to apply uniform standards to civilian standards or civilian settings. And I just, how do you, from the command structure perspective, speak to the people who may be listening who are in that camp, that they've been burned by having somebody snitch on them, so to speak?
Right.
Like, explain the rationale to them so they can understand.
Right.
I know I kind of did a little bit, but
yeah, well, so that's part of it. So the attrition, our military does not work without America's most precious resource, and that's its sons and daughters. That's period. That is hands down. And before I kind of go into any further detail about how the DoD kind of reports or how that works, especially with the Tennessee National Guard, I have to first have this caveat in saying, that I do not represent the Department of Defense, and my opinions or expressions don't represent the Tennessee National Guard as a whole. I can only give you kind of a guideline.
Yeah. Now, and I meant mainly just the justification behind it.
So
put it into context for them, because like I said, that is still a wound that a lot of us walk around with, thinking that we were betrayed.
Oh, 100%.
when we
And
opened up.
First off, I want to say, if anyone feels that way, I'm reaching out to you directly. Don't let that stop you from getting help. Let me explain why it was and I won't say it was a necessity. And the reason why I put that disclaimer out there is because as a commander, I can only give you my personal experience or why or what the doctrine states or what the
and every situation is different.
Every situation is different. Nothing is cookie cutter. So what's supposed to happen is the commander is supposed to be aware or notified that an individual that because they are responsible for what's called their readiness. Right. So like you said, we can't have any attrition of any kind. And we have to take what's called acceptable risk, and losing a soldier to suicide is not an acceptable risk. So it's one of those things. If we have a mission, we can send our sons and daughters to get, to breach an obstacle with explosives, and we have to accept that risk. But the one thing that is really difficult to swallow is if a soldier takes their own life, it looks really bad on not just that it looks bad on the unit, it looks bad on the commander, but it also, like you said, it's almost like a cancer, right? They walk around with that wound. We lost that son and daughter, and we didn't have to. It could have been prevented. So there are regulations in place. You have to, it has to be brought up between your chain upwards in the chain of command, and it has to be, your chaplain needs to be notified, your company commander needs to be notified. But what's important to note here is that you may have felt like you've been snitched, and that may be true. There may have been malicious intent. That I can't invalidate that experience. Your experience is valid. I'm talking to them directly, right? So your experience is valid. But that being said, there's earnest intention behind. We don't want to lose you. We don't. And a lot of the time, the training we received, it's not enough. It's not enough to handle that. So we have to pass the buck. And I'll tie that into my earlier comment that I didn't quite finish. When you tell the chain of command how you can soften that blow, and what should have been done was, listen, this unit is a family, and you don't have to tell the first sergeant or just the first sergeant, right? You can go to the chaplain. So if you feel like the first sergeant or the commander has a very heavy stance against, so like, for example, I feel like everybody that takes their own life are cowardly and they should just go ahead and do it. If they have that approach, obviously it's going to be difficult to convince that service member to go talk to them, right? But you still have to notify the chain of command. So what you can do is you say, well, listen, I understand your trepidation, and I don't want you to be uncomfortable having this conversation, but I do want to help you. Let's go talk to the chaplain together. Let's work on a plan together. So that way you don't have to navigate by this yourself. You don't have to go and approach the company command. We can report it upward in an upward fashion to our chain of command, still follow the regulations, still notify our leadership, but it doesn't necessarily have to feel like you got snitched on.
Right.
But that's what's important. If you feel like you've been betrayed, it was a failure. I'll just say it. It was a failure. Yeah. And we need to do better. And I understand that happens. But the reason why is we just don't want to lose you, and we don't want that attrition to happen. We don't want that unacceptable risk to take hold in our rank, because when you go, or when our service members are lost, that there's a void, and we're all left feeling it, and we're left feeling it indefinitely in many cases. Yeah. So
I just wanted to, like I said, to speak to. It can feel adversarial though at the moment.
Oh yeah.
And
it can.
And obviously I hope that with time people can look back and say, hey, okay, even though that might have hurt my feelings at the time, at least I wasn't, able to carry out that plan that I was thinking about doing.
Right. I'm still here. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's just a part of it. It's easier to kind of just go, well, I don't know. I'm not going to be as callous to say I'm not taking responsibility for whatever was happening in my life at that time. When I say the generic, my life at that time.
Right. Right.
But I do think that can undermine what resources you use available, what resources that you tend to utilize in another time in the future, so to speak. So I wanted to kind of clear the air from a command structure perspective. Somebody who's an officer talking to an enlisted guy, that, hey, your intentions were pure. it wasn't just, and I know I'm not asking you to speak for all officers necessarily,
I can't.
but I'm just saying that, that there is earnest, intent behind some of the actions that you have to do. And it's an unbelievably heavy responsibility to be a leader of men and to be responsible for their lives. And you have to take that really seriously. And sometimes that means a little bit of pain to keep from a larger wound, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. It's what we deem acceptable risk. So a concept that I apply to suicidal ideation or intervention, if you will, is guidance. And what I mean by guidance, and you'll pick it up as soon as I say it, the guidance determines the amount of force that a situation would require. So, for example, how hard is it to have a conversation? It's not, right? So asking the question, are you thinking about suicide, is difficult, and we need to ask it more, and we need to ask it directly. But that is a lot easier than, say, that individual is putting a gun in their mouth and you have to stop them immediately. So what do? There's two different levels of guidance for those scenarios, right? The individual that is immediately in harm's way requires more guidance and more effort driven towards that situation than just the individual that may be demonstrating a few invitations or saying, hey, I'm just not feeling good and I'm just having a bad day and I don't want to talk about it. That requires significantly less guidance than, say, a first responder or a police officer walking up on somebody about to jump off of the Golden Gate Bridge, right? So there's two different scenarios, right? That level of guidance, when we, as commanders, we have to be privy to that. And we also have to understand that we can't make any promises we can't keep, right? That's one thing. But another thing is sometimes we have to go and raise that level of guidance to protect the individual.
Sure.
And sometimes they may hate us for that. But I'll give you a perfect example, if you don't mind, a real life scenario.
Sure.
I had a fellow veteran who was a close friend of mine at the time, and he demonstrated some invitations, right? But he never would come and talk to, like, we tried talking to him about it. He said he was fine. He didn't need the help. And what eventually happened was the bill always comes due, right? You can only stuff it for so long. Eventually the bill is going to come due and you have to pay it. And it usually in the form of a mental crisis or, a situation that what occurred, he swallowed his entire pharmacy. Like he had his whole entire pharmaceutical cabinet. He just swallowed every pill. Sent us a final goodbye text and was like, hey, and then got behind the wheel of his car. And I won't give you the whole, because that'll take way too long. But the long story short is I, as a friend and also as a commander, had to utilize a resource called Mobile Crisis. And Mobile Crisis went to him to do a welfare check. At first, we tried going through the authorities. And long story short, he was very persuasive, but he was able to convince that he was fine. He convinced the authorities he was fine.
Yeah.
So then, but I had to show the text messages saying that and the pictures, and I had his mom go check his house. His pharmaceutical cabinet was empty with empty pill bottles everywhere. That man had swallowed everything. So we knew that there was a ticking clock and he was behind the wheel. So now other people are in danger too. And I had to make a very difficult call and call Mobile Crisis. And they approached him cordially and he fought them. They tased him like 6 times and threw him and restrained him, transported him to a hospital where he had a 72-hour hold. They deemed him, they gave him that charcoal substance in which you puke everything and absorbs all. But they pumped his stomach and he survived. They said if he was about 2 minutes late, he probably wouldn't be with us. And he went completely against his will. He tried to fight the staff based off of his actions, behaviors, and how he was, approached there. They did decide that he needed to be taken to a mental hospital where they held him for over a week and almost 2 weeks. And they refused to let him have a cell phone. He was cold. He couldn't, his visitation had to be supervised and you had to have a special code to even talk to him. his access to the outside world was restricted, and no individual of modern times would appreciate that, right? Like you take someone's phone and watch how antsy they get.
Sure. Yeah.
But at the end, what's the whole reason why I tell, even though I had to have this man committed, he was tased 6 times. He had bruises on his body from where they took him in. But at the end of it, when he was released from that hospital and he went back home, I got a phone call from that man. And do you know what he told me? He said, "Thank you. You saved my life."
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to make a hard call.
Yeah.
That level of guidance may be higher, but if you know that individual, it's worth it to keep, and they may hate you.
Yeah.
But
I get, like I said, I just, maybe sometimes things got a little disproportional, to go with your force analogy, and maybe someone was saying something that they were just needing to talk, and there was an overcorrection, and that is where people are coming from.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I just, like I said, I just really wanted to hammer down on it's not just a cover your ass situation.
Right.
No, leadership.
It's a genuine, in most cases, it's genuine. And that overcorrection also comes from that we do have regulations that stay, if they even mention the word suicide, it's a commander, it's a CCIR. It's commander critical information requirement. Like, you have to send it up. Now, there are better ways to do. Execution is always where we're going to need work.
Sure.
Right? We could always use more training. And like you said, that overcorrections, they happen. They do.
Yeah.
But I've known very few cases, very, very, very few, where they just did it to stick it to the service member, right? Like, just like,
of course.
Through that cat. They just were ill-prepared. And the way that leadership corrects that, talk about it. Be open to talking about it. Walk the walk, talk the talk. Have that open door policy. And it starts with you. If you're looking for change in the military, it doesn't happen overnight, and it starts with you. That's the only acceptable answer. Like, if you say, well, how can we change the system? It can't be changed if you don't try.
Sure.
And that's it.
I guess the last thing that I kind of wanted to circle is, obviously you have to have a great amount of reverence for these kind of positions that you're in. How do you approach somebody being a little too overconfident in these situations? Taking on more, how does one recognize when they've exceeded their ability to respond?
That's a great question. I always at first say, listen, I admire the enthusiasm, because we need the enthusiasm. We do. And I say, just be careful. Don't take it home with you.
Yeah.
This line of work, it's the reward. You have to hang on to the wins.
Sure.
And sometimes the wins are vastly outnumbered by the losses.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to know that you can't save everybody. That doesn't mean you need to stop trying, right?
Yeah.
You got to try to save everybody. But the reality is, at least from personal experience, you can't save everybody. But what you can do is you can go home knowing that you tried. And you can also go home knowing that, and to tie it into our previous element with passing the buck, you got to know your limitations. If you know you can't stay at somebody's house 24/7, don't offer. But when we say pass the buck, you could say, listen, I'm worried about you. And let's say if it's a family member or someone that you're just too close to, and you have to know your limits and know, I can't be the person that is the suicidal ideation intervention. I can't be that person. So then you got to figure out who is. You have to be able to pass the buck. You have to be able to locate resources, whether it be, listen, I can't be the guy that's going to see you through this. Who is? And you just ask them, who would be meaningful for you? Would you like to talk to the chaplain with me? Would you like to talk to your pastor with me? Would you like, here's my phone. Let's call Safe Talk together. Let's call the suicide hotline together. Let's call in the individual, let's call mobile crisis if the individual is feeling like they're in immediate danger.
Sure.
Let's call the non-emergency number. Let's call the counseling line. Let's call Military One Source. Let's do whatever we can to get through this tonight. Even if I can't be the one to help you, let me find someone who is. That's passing the buck. And
all right, so that's more of a positive thing than I thought originally, because when you hear pass the buck, there's almost there's a negative valence to it.
No, I mean that in the most like, listen, know your limitations, and like, you're holding a torch, and like, so a first responder isn't going to open your chest cavity and operate on your heart.
No,
they're not going to do that. They're going to stabilize you, and they're going to get you to a doctor. And that's what we are. We're suicide first aid responders. That's what we do.
So when you're a veteran out there and you're just talking to a buddy that you may be concerned about, and they start displaying these signs or these signals, invitations. I think that's what I was more getting to. I have heard people talk about from a perspective where they almost inject themselves. They're trying to do heart surgery, and it's beyond their expertise. And how do you reinforce this? Hey, this may be a bigger problem than you're equipped to deal with. Because even at the professional level, like, where do you go? Where is this? Where my competency ends, so to speak? What's the good line that a person can look at to say, I need to call somebody else in on this? And I don't know if there's a clear demarcation there.
No intention or demarcation per se. I would submit, in the instance between the beginning of that conversation and the execution of that conversation, there is that feeling where when you're having this organic conversation and you've asked the hard question, like, hey man, when I've noticing these invitations, I'm noticing these signs or signals. I got to ask you a question. Are you thinking about killing yourself? They say yes. And then you start navigating. Okay. Have you thought of a plan? Why do you feel this way? When time you were happy, can you tell me about that? Can you tell me why you feel this way, or what do you even know? If not, that's okay. We'll navigate this together. Right. And the second you feel like that you feel like they're a danger to themselves or others, or they're asking too much, like they're like, hey, can you stay with me for 3 weeks straight? Your job probably isn't going to allow that. Right. So again, never making a promise you can't keep. So when you realize, you feel like, you'll be like, I think I bit off more than I can chew here. I've literally never had someone say that this is a problem by simply going, you know what? I really want to help you, but I think I've hit a point where I think I need to bring someone else in, or I need to make sure that you're going to be okay. Let's do. And then you kind of divert the conversation from what can I do for you to how can we collectively, through our tools and our information, our resources, get you through this. Sure. And that's how you start from somebody's like, because I'm going to tell you, man, my phone's going to always be open and available to you. And I'm always going to have that open door policy. Those are things I live by, but not everybody can. And if you're hitting a point where somebody's just contacting you over and over and over and over and over, and you've just hit a mental limit, like, listen, I'm trying to help you, and I'm really wanting to be that person. I think we're going to need some additional guidance. How do you feel about talking to a counselor on the phone? You can use my phone. We'll talk to him together. Or, hey, you know that chaplain? I know that chaplain personally. He's a great dude, and he's not going to snitch your business to the lower enlisted or lower levels. Let's have a chat with him. I know he'll have a meeting with us today. That's when you take that torch and you hand it to that's when the first aid responder wheels it into to that operating room and says, doctor, that heart surgery is all yours. I'm not touching it. Right. And we can do that at a basic level, at an individual level. Know that limit. If you start noticing that, well, if you'll just give me some money, if you can give me some money, I know that if I can just buy my debt off, then I won't be so suicidal. Can you do that? Should you do that? That's something you have to answer yourself. Right. And there's two paths you can take. You can be the overzealous, like, yeah, I'll give you my whole while. You can have my house. You can do the Canadian treatment, right? Where you can have my leg and my snowmobile. You can just give everything in the world. But then that also puts you at a state where you may not be able to deliver, and you still might not save them.
Yeah, it's not about you either.
Right. It's not about
And I guess that would be where my line is whenever this becomes more about how you're feeling about it than about what they're feeling about it, you've reached your limit.
Absolutely.
You've crossed the line.
Yeah, if you're trying to be the hero, it's natural to want to be the hero, right?
Yeah, especially in our community, man.
Yeah,
You know,
we're leaders. Yeah, we're hard
Yeah.
chargers, you know, and I understand the narrative. Like when we talked about, you know, and I forgive my language, but when we talk about how, you know, everything is either a nomenclature or a suffix at the end where we're warriors, like we're a keyboard warrior, we're food warriors, we're, you know, game warriors, we're all these, you know, we add warrior as in like it's a rite of passage, right? So when we're as a soldier, we want to be the epitome of everything we can be. It's in our motto. Like it's, you know, we want to be the apex predator. And that extends to almost multiple or every facet of life. And that includes wanting to help your friend. You want to be the one that slaps them across the face and be like, get it together. And you might not be that person. Like, for example, if it's a relative, they may not want to hear it from you. I know if I were trying to talk to my family, it coming from me would be useless. It'd have to be somebody else. So I'd have to get them to agree to talk to someone else. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, the messenger matters as much as the message sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The execution, my motto that I go by is, it's not always the story, it's how it's told. Like that's important.
Yeah. I don't know. I just, there's a couple of times in my personal life in which I've been talking to veterans about somebody that they believe is a risk. And some of the times I get this idea that they're a little overconfident. They feel like they've got it handled. And it's like, look, this is really hard to predict.
Yes.
And you do not want, it's better to be a little overcautious than undercautious. Don't think that you have as much, don't think that your skills are just better than a trained psychologist, you know, that's been trained to the doctoral level.
Yeah.
Because goodness, if they can make mistakes at it, how is it that somebody who's a layman largely, how can you not think that you're going to make those same mistakes too? It's hard to predict is what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, and if you ever feel this sense of, I don't know what to say.
Like, always. Every time.
You should find somebody that does know what to say at that point, you know. Tap in is I'd say tap in instead of pass the buck, you know, like, you know, the tag team champions of the world, you know, tap in, like let somebody else come in.
In my head, I envision passing a torch, right? Saying, hey, okay, in charge now. Yeah. And I feel like I can tell you that no matter how many, I've had several successful interventions and real life experience, and I never feel like I know everything. I never feel like that I'm so confident that that person's going to see it through at the end. I always take it case by case because no case is the same. Every individual is different. And the best thing, the fear of failure shouldn't stop you from trying, but you should also respect the circumstance and the life or death stake that you are in. Like, and you're going to feel it. Anybody that's like, I don't have anxiety over these matters anymore, have just done it so much that they've become jaded. And that's how you know your left and right limit. If you know you're jaded, a perfect example that I work with police officers all the time. You know how many, you know, welfare checks they go in on and the things that they see the worst that humanity has to offer. Right. And they've seen people call and call and call. And then they've been like, oh, just, you know, they're just calling for attention. And then, you know, next thing you know, they've suicided and they have to go home with that. Right. Or they become jaded. And you have to know, like, if you don't have the emotional or capacity to be the person that actually helps, know who does. That's exactly, you pinned it. Know who does, know your resources, know your tools, and be like, listen, I'm not the guy. I'm just not that empathetic. And that's okay, because their story, your experiences, your story, that's valid. You know, you went through it. That is absolutely valid. And I know, like, combat hardened veterans that have seen tons of, you know, destruction or anything may be harder to approach. And if you know that, and you know that you're quick to anger when someone talks about suicide, just know that you have to be at least in a position enough to have that self-awareness and also still navigate the conversation so you don't lose that veteran or soldier, and you can get them the help they still need. You know, even if it's not from you.
A soldier friend of mine just earlier today, he said, because he deals with he's got a pretty stressful job. He also works in law enforcement. And he just said, sometimes I just have to let somebody know I don't have any more room in my cup for you.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. Because having that insight about what more you can give is far more useful than just faking it till you make it, because you can end up.
Yeah. It's like trying to hire a realtor and expecting a world-class realtor. And then it's just somebody that kind of did it part-time once, didn't even have their license. Right. And then you're expecting, this world-class realtor that's going to sell your home, and they actually work at McDonald's full time, and they don't even have their realtor license. And then they come in and like, yeah, I'll sell your home. Like, then you're
they're out of their lane. Yeah.
And that, I hate to use that analogy, but that's really, if like you say, if your cup runneth over, it's important to know that. And it's important to be like, listen, I'm not the guy.
It's funny. We talked about last episode, the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it almost oddly applies here too.
Yeah.
And for those who didn't hear it last time, is the Dunning-Kruger effect is people who are really competent within any domain, people who have a really strong set of skills, are painfully aware of where their skill limitations are.
Yeah.
And those who are not as good at a particular skill, they overestimate their abilities a lot. And so when it comes to life and death issues, potentially, don't overestimate your abilities. Don't think that you've got more control over it than you do. Because if somebody who has been trained like for 1,000 hours, like Jonathan here, or somebody who has had doctoral level like psychology and psychiatry training, if they can still not get it 100% right, just err on the side of caution and go, I realize that I probably don't know everything here. But if I could just attempt to summarize what we've talked about here.
Yeah.
As poorly as I'll probably, it's number one, pay attention and check on your buddies a lot, and just look for deviations from the norm, so to speak. If there's something that they're doing and it's giving you the tingles, you get your spidey sense activated, there's probably a reason for that. And just check in on it. Ask directly. If you think, ask. And if you have the opportunity to talk about it, understand that just asking is going to take a huge emotional investment out of you. So don't promise that you're going to be able to do something that you can't.
And I think a big part to caveat with that is just asking the question shows that you care enough to ask that, because that's a hard question to ask sometimes, right? So it just being there and being alone is going to go so far. And then just respecting that conversation, and that it could be life or death. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you can always backpedal. Like you say, if you get angry, you can be like, hey, listen, I'm sorry. We're talking about life or death. We're talking about suicide. I'm emotionally invested in you, and I'm worried about you. Let me backtrack a bit. And, so don't be afraid to make mistakes, but at the same time, like you say, don't sit there and think that you have all the answers. When your own anxiety is telling you otherwise.
Yeah, sure.
And if you feel like you shut down in the conversation, tell them. Be like, I feel like, did I say something that I feel like offended you? Or it feels like this conversation is coming to a close, and I don't think you're safe yet. And
sure.
I know it seems silly to be so direct, but I promise you, if you just cut the BS and you go straight to the wick of the matter, and you're like, listen, you're demonstrating these signs or invitations, and I'm worried about you. I'm worried about your safety. Are you thinking about killing yourself? I promise that goes so far.
Yeah. Because they may, there may be times in which they're not really aware of how transparent it may be. And they may be like, oh, man.
No. And the worst case, they go, no, I'm fine, you douche. And you're like, okay, I'm just checking, man. And then you go back to joking around, and the worst thing they can do is be like, yes. And then you prepare for that, right? And you navigate that conversation together. Yeah. But if you ask and they say no, what did it harm you? You're not out of anything.
Sure. And to just kind of get back to the summarizing. So
sorry.
If you have if you have an opportunity to pay attention to what your buddies are doing, and if you get those, if you're feeling those vibes off of them, just to ask directly and understand that they're going to feel pretty complicated about it, and they're looking for somebody to talk them out of it a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
They're looking for a reason to live. And when it comes to like previous injuries or previous negative experiences, those decisions, although they may have been painful, may have had the most sincere motivations behind them, and choose to see them as generously as possible. And don't cut your nose off to spite your face, so to speak. Utilize mental health care facilities again. Just because if somebody hurt your feelings or somebody let you down or they betrayed your trust doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case moving forward.
And it doesn't mean that you don't deserve the help.
Yeah.
You deserve it.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation, Jonathan. I hope all of us out there listening didn't go, man, those guys rattled on for a while.
Yeah, man, I it's so hard. I want to use so much. My language, I had to reel it in. So
here's the thing. This conversation can't really be done in an hour. Can't really be done in 10 hours. It's so in depth. I just wanted to kind of give an opportunity, because we're all thinking about it, especially right after Veterans Day was last week. There's a lot of complicated feelings we feel about our service and where we're at now in the world. So if there's somebody, where should people go to if they're looking for help? And what is the resource that you feel is the most vital? If they're out there, say they're out there in Germany, say they're out there on the West Coast, no matter where you're at, what resource do you think that they should utilize if they're having an issue or they're having an issue with their buddy? I know that's a loaded question.
And that's okay, because I pride myself on the ability to tackle any complicated, scenario or situation, because I've seen it. It depends. So if they are civilians, the Safe Talk line, the actual phone number seems to be more helpful, and just getting addressed. But that doesn't mean that you hand them the phone and say, call this number, right? Now, if they're military or if they're a veteran, there's so much out there. Military One Source. If they call the Safe Talk line and hit the 1 button, that takes them to a veteran counselor immediately. Okay. So then that's a very specific resource, right? But Military One Source is also something I would recommend. I've personally used it. I have used it in a variety of circumstances and situations. And sometimes, the individual wasn't receptive, but in most cases they are. And usually the individual that wasn't receptive usually has a reason behind it. Like they're angry a little bit, and they're still navigating those emotions, which is absolutely okay. You can't expect somebody to have all of their, mental clarity when they can't see 5 feet from them, right? They can't see the 50-meter target from all the miasmic fog of depression or their issues. So that's completely understandable. But if I were to, Military One Source, Safe Talk, the suicide hotline. There's also, I mentioned mobile crisis earlier. If you feel that they are a danger to themselves or others, mobile crisis is a great resource.
And you can Google, you can Google mobile crisis, and it'll give you a number for wherever your geographical location is.
And for your area, your specific area. Yeah, you'll call them. There'll be somebody that picks up the phone, and then they'll route you to an area. If it's available in your area, they'll route you to that number, and in which case you'll have a small interview and a conversation in which you express your concern for the individual, and they take it from there. That is absolutely a viable resource, but only use that resource, like I said, if you feel like they're a danger to themselves or others. Yeah. That's important, because you may get tased, or they may get tased. Jokingly, I'm being facetious.
There's it's a higher level of intervention, so to say.
That force is, it's definitely a higher level. But then there's also just other, if they feel like nicotine cessation or drinking is they're actual programs that you can Google, like Too Much to Lose or You Can Quit Too, which actually is a great organization to help you with tobacco cessation that I'm actually affiliated with. There's all sorts of things that are out there. You just have to kind of find them. And sometimes that can seem like the most challenging part, but really if you're doing it together, if they're not doing it alone, that's the if they feel isolated and they feel like they're taking this on by themselves, they may not be thinking clearly. They may not know what they need. How can they explore their emotional needs or their mental needs if they don't know them? Right.
Sure.
And having somebody there helping them through that, like, hey, let's safe talk together. And in that way, both of you can identify, man, that resource did not help. Right. Let's try to find something else. But your local community, the non-emergency number is also great just to figure out what may be out there.
Right.
And there's all sorts of, avenues or approach. The good news about today is that there are more resources today than yesterday.
Sure.
And that's you just have to navigate them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to put a pin in it. I know
so much.
we have to have you on again because I know that there's just too much to talk about with this topic. And you're just you are a geyser of information. You're beyond
a charge. I'm a creator charge. 40
you're better than a wealth of knowledge. You are a geyser of information. You have so much that you can go into. But as always, if there's some topic that somebody would like to hear us cover here at Vet with a Mic, by all means, please reach out to me through all the social media platforms. If you feel like somebody out there could benefit from listening to this conversation, please forward them to any of the podcatchers that we have available here for the podcast, or YouTube also, which is where the video will be found. But as always, however life finds you, I hope life finds you well. Till next time.
Cheers.